This reading is from Rays of the One Light. The reading is based on the commentary of Paramahansa Yogananda. This week's reading is, Why do devotees fall? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, yet he betrayed Jesus and earned for himself the opprobrium of Christendom for all futurity for his sin. We find Jesus reprimanding Jesus just days before the betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing, with his death, the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to anoint his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the purse, and bare was what was therein. Then said Jesus, let her alone. Against the day of my burying has she kept this. For the poor always ye have with ye, but me ye not have always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it, indeed fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains nirvikalpa samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes, the importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the second chapter, Sri Krishna states, if one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation, the delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty, and when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramahansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
From Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda, a book of prayer demands. The bee of my mind loves to drink from thy blue lotus feet. O Divine Mother, the bee of my mind is ever engrossed in thy lotus feet of blue light. It drinks the honey of thy motherly love. This bee will drink no other honey, but that which is graced by thy perfume sweetness. O Divine Mother, flying over the gardens of my fancy, denying myself the honey of lesser pleasures, I have found at last the ambrosia buried in thy lotus heart. I have been thy busy bee. I have soared through the fields of many incarnations, breathing the airs of countless experiences. I will roam no more. Thy fragrance has quenched at last the perfumed thirst of my soul. I was reading in the, good morning, I was reading in the New Path by Swami Kriyananda. Swami had 3.5 years with Yoganandaji, and Swami was writing quite a bit during satsangs, writing down notes and also asking questions. And he spent quite a bit of time with Yogananda at the desert retreat of 29 Palms. In one conversation, they were talking about Moses being an avatar, a descent of spirit into human flesh. And he had a great mission to do, as did Abraham. So they started to talk further about the disciples of Christ. And Yogananda just said, for those disciples to be with Jesus, they would have had to been high souls, great souls already. And that was when Swami asked, including Judas. And Judas, yes, was a very advanced soul. Now, Judas had a role to play, particularly in the life of Christ. But when Yogananda was talking about Judas, Judas had karma, money karma, but he was also very bright. He was the only one of the disciples who spoke and wrote in Greek. He had an education. He was experienced in the world, but he also had that attachment to the world through money. Now, I was also listening to other talks of Kriyananda's recently, one on karma. And Judas had enough strength to overcome that particular karma with Jesus, not to betray him. But because of what Jesus needed to go through and to experience the resurrection so all could see the resurrection, Judas had to play this role of betrayal. And what really struck Swami was that when they were talking about it, Yoganandaji said, and I met Judas in this lifetime. And there was an experience with Sri Ramakrishna in Dakshineshwar, where Jesus appeared to Sri Ramakrishna, who was a great saint of the 19th century, one that Yoganandaji really was attracted to, especially the temples there in Dakshineshwar. A Bengali saint was Ramakrishna. He appeared to Ramakrishna and said, would you take Judas as your disciple in this lifetime? Now, I don't know if Jesus appeared before Judas had reincarnated at this life, or he was already a Bengali, but soon after that, he became a disciple of Ramakrishna. And then in that lifetime, he became liberated, free. Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You're not free, we're not free until we're in Nirvikalpa. And Savikalpa is a very, very high state of consciousness, but you can still get trapped and pulled back down into that force of delusion, as Eric was reading about. Delusion, don't underestimate it. It's very subtle. It is very, very tricky. But when we persevere, we can get through it. We start to understand what is a trap and what is the road to freedom. So it's important to realize those manholes, those potholes in the road to freedom, and know that delusion can be very tricky. But Yogananda also said, because Swami asked him, what was he like? Because Yogananda had met him in this lifetime. And he said he was very quiet and to himself and a little attracted to money. And he was attracted to money, but just on the complete 360. He was using money to help the poor, to offer it. And it's not like he had the purse as he did when he was with Jesus. He had enough money to give to others. And his disciples, other disciples, would tease him about this attraction and this thing about money, even though he was giving it. And Ramakrishna would scold the other disciples. Leave him alone. He suffered enough. So this road to freedom, you don't want to think too much about it because it can give you a headache. You cannot get into karma so much. Judas played a role. He was a high soul already, but he came in specifically to do something which was big, major, and major betrayal, and for a bag of silver. But that's what he needed to do. His soul needed to act that out. Now maybe he had the strength to overcome it, but Jesus needed to resurrect, to let the world know about resurrection. And the instrument of that resurrection, he needed Judas to act this out. That's why at the Last Supper, that's the beautiful story. Just saying, whoever dips the bread into oil after me will betray me. And he was speaking Maybe not loud for all the disciples and people that were there to hear him, but those who were close to him, he said, I was going to be betrayed. And it was like a fog went over the disciples. They didn't quite catch it. And even when he said, whoever dips the bread into the oil after me is the one, it was Judas who did it. And then he looks at him, and he afterwards says, do what you have to do. Go and do what you have to do. And none of the disciples reacted. It needed to happen that way. It needed to play out in the great scheme of life. And it played out to the fullest, but 2,000 years later, here comes the soul of Judas incarnating in India with an avatar, Ramakrishna, an avatar par excellence. And you feel that today at the ashram, at his ashram. Those vibrations don't leave. They're still there, but you feel them. And he came in, Judas did. Who knows if that was his next incarnation or he had other ones he had to go through? Who knows? But he found freedom. He found freedom 2,000 Earth years later. Now there's that other story, beautiful story of Chaitanya, who lived many thousands of years ago, a great lover of God. And his guru, who I don't remember, but the question was to the guru, when will I find liberation, Master? And so, oh, you'll find it in, this lifetime. Oh, you'll find it in 2 lifetimes. You'll find it in 10 lifetimes. So he was asking these questions. And Chaitanya said, and the other disciples knew that Chaitanya was a very, very high soul. And then Chaitanya asked, when will I find liberation, Master? You'll find it in 1,000,000 lifetimes. And then they were shocked. And he said it so strongly to them that Chaitanya got up and he left the temple, and the other disciples were just horrified, that feeling that he was so advanced. How could Master, how could the Guru really say this? So they went out to find Chaitanya, and he's just out in the courtyard, just dancing with joy, feeling that vibration, freedom. And they're like, Chaitanya, what are you doing? Didn't you hear what the Master said? He said, didn't you hear what he said? That I would find liberation. He didn't care if it was 1,000,000 lifetimes. He will find liberation. We will all find liberation. You can't get out of it. You can delay it as long as you want, but it's going to happen. And it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing when it does happen. Now, we can go into Nirvikalpa in this lifetime. It would take a lot of practice, a lot of Kriya Yogas. And if we go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we go right through the astral world into the causal world. What did Sri Yukteswar said? I'm on the planet Haranyaloka in the astral universe, and only souls that have reached Nirvikalpa can go to this planet because I can aid them. I'm there to help them and go beyond that. Now, isn't it just amazing how the mind can just go with that thought and just kind of wonder like, wow, that is really far out, but what the heck does it mean? It means that we're going to be liberated sooner or later. And whether it's the astral or the causal world, it does not matter. What's going to matter is that we won't have to come back to this university, planet Earth, or the hospital, or God's zoo is what Yogananda used to call it. We won't have to come back here. Now, it is interesting, it's important to read that passage in the Gita, because that tells you what happens. If one ponders sense attractions, just ponder it. That's the doorway into the spiral. One leads to the other. It spirals and it spirals, and it takes those qualities of the soul, which we all have, and it begins to tug them down into the lower 3 chakras. Let's just stay here. The lower 3 chakras representing the physical world, the material world. Let's stay here where it's safe and comfortable. That feeling, that familiar warmth that we're so used to. We don't really want to go up here. It takes a lot of work to go into the higher chakras. Let's just stay right here. So that pondering, and that pondering of the lower chakras and bringing it down, it pulls, and it wants us to stay into the pleasures of the world that's offered to us out there, into the great strip malls of life. We want to go to those. Let's go, let's get out there. Now, remember in the Gita, right before the battle, Pandavas are lined up. The Pandavas are the qualities, positive qualities of the soul. That's good. What they're lined up against are the Kauravas. The Kauravas represent the senses. That's the pull down. And where do Arjuna and Krishna go? I mean, the Mahabharata is a book this thick. And right in the middle of it, basically, is the Bhagavad Gita. Small little sliver of that big, wonderful, beautiful book that you should all read. And when you get into the Gita, where do they have their discourse? He did not stay with the Pandavas. Arjuna did not. He went right to the center of the two armies lined up. The discourse happens in the center between good and other qualities which are going to pull you down, the positive and the negatives. They all are lined up to battle. They meet in the center and they have discourse. Now, the center represents us. We are in the center. We're in the middle. We're in the middle of the battle. And the middle is in the spine, the chakras. And we get caught by the opposing armies of the Kauravas, and our energy pulls down a little bit. And it can be just through thought that pulls us down, or through memory, or something lodged in the heart chakra that wounded us several years ago, or several lifetimes ago, who knows, and there's a little bit of a pull down. Let's go down and let's start to feel sorry for ourselves, and let's get into the familiar warmth of being stuck. Now, the Pandavas say, no, wait a minute. We need to go up. So then we start to have inspiration. We start to feel inspired. We start to read and meditate, and the qualities start to go up. We start to go up. We can raise our consciousness. We start to feel expansive. So it's a constant ebb and flow of the pull down into lower, or the pull up into higher. And Kurukshetra, the great battlefield, I've said this many times, it is the spinal highway, the chakras. That is the battlefield. It's not the megaplex of Dallas or any big city. It's right in here. We get affected by a lot of consciousness and a lot of thought that pulls our energy up or down. Or sometimes we just stay right in the middle. This is why it's so good to read the Gita. It is very good. Or just read the slokas, because it's the handbook to freedom. And Krishna is telling Arjuna, do this and you'll get out. And Arjuna has many, many difficulties. He does not want to fight. He drops his bow. I cannot fight my cousins. That familiar warmth, my friends, I cannot fight them. He drops his bow, and the bow represents his spine. So in other words, he's slumped in his chariot. And Krishna is like, you need to fight. You need to stand up and face these foes. There is no death. There's no death. We need to attack them. If you don't, this isn't going to come out very well. And that tendency, the Kauravas are going to rule the day. They're going to rule. That battle lasted 18 days. They're going to rule it. You cannot let this happen, Arjuna. So he gets them and he shares the discourse. So it is very important, because Krishna is showing us this is how you get onto the highway to freedom, and this is how you overcome. The chapter that reading that Eric read, the chapter, it's under the heading of the nature of right action, and it comes at the very end, basically, of the chapter, where he reads what Eric read. This is what causes the problem, people. And then Jesus, he had people to work with. It was Krishna and Arjuna had this dialogue. But Jesus had the multitudes to speak to, and he had 12 disciples. And one of them needed to play it all out the way he did, which was Judas. But Jesus wasn't talking just to his 12. He was talking to the multitudes. But he had a lot of time with his 12 disciples. So you see, when you blend in the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Gita, Yogananda called them the Holy Bible of the East, the Gita, and the Bible of the West. These two books are so similar. Now, there's been a lot of variations out there and editing of the books, but if you can find the essence of both of them, that's what Yogananda tried to do, to show that Arjuna and Krishna had dialogue, And this dialogue was vital for not just the East, but for the West, for everybody. And Jesus had dialogue. The Bible is the dialogue. When you read the New Testaments from the disciples, it's not just for the West, it's also for the East. There is a blending of both. And we have to realize and we have to understand in ourselves the power of delusion. It is so subtle. You think there are times when I think, oh, I'm doing really well. This is great. And as soon as I think that way, there's a little bit of a bomb that can go off and it can want to explode me downwards instead of going upwards. We have to be, this is why Yogananda was saying so much, stay even-minded and cheerful. Don't be affected. Live more in the chakras and come out and deal with people. Live more in the chakra means, not to walk around not talking to people and just pulling away from people, but engage. You engage in life, but you're doing it with your whole soul, your whole consciousness. You live it in the world, but you're not attached to it. You live in the world, but you're not attached to it. That's why Yogananda would always go out. In the 1920s, when he was at Radio City Music Hall, he bought his ticket and he walked in, this place is mine. I own this. And so for that 1 hour or 90 minutes, whatever he did to walk through Radio City Music Hall, when he walked out the doors, he said, I give it back. So he had it. He had it for that 90 minutes as his own. He enjoyed every single square inch of it. Then he left it, it was gone. He was done with it. When he had his motorcycle in the 1930s, he loved it. Absolutely loved it, driving all around. And then when one of his friends or cousin comes up and says, that's a beautiful bike. Oh, do you want it? He gave it to him. His father didn't like that, but Yogananda just gave it to him. He was just not attached to it. It just didn't belong to him. Given as a gift through the divine and given back as a gift to the divine. That's the beauty of what we do. We are actually great souls. I don't mean to pump up our egos and run out the door saying we're great souls, but we are great souls on a journey to freedom. Now, when we are around people, whether you work people or whether people have a clue what you do in life, you're still a great soul and you're sending off that vibration very subtly to many, many people. And people will feel it. If you can feel somebody anger towards you and it can hit you hard, you can also feel that when you're giving out positive energy, they can feel that. They might not register it, but they know that there's something happening. So we have to remember that every single day is a brand new universe. Yesterday, Saturday's gone. It's way, way, way gone. Today's a brand new day. We wake up in the morning and we go forward. New day and new universe. I wanted to close because that sloka we read from the Gita, I absolutely love it because it's a very good reminder how subtle it can be. But implicit in that sloka is this promise, and this is a promise. For when a person concentrates on spiritual ideals, he feels himself increasingly attracted toward them. From this attraction grows the desire to live by them. But the desire to live spiritually develops into an intense yearning for God. Such divine yearning flames to impatience with anything that might prevent one from realizing Him. From this impatience, with lesser realities arises total absorption in the consciousness of God. From such absorption ensues forgetfulness of the senses. And from sense forgetfulness arises indifference to worldly modes of thinking and behaving. Estrangement from worldly consciousness results in the complete annihilation of delusion. It's not just a dire warning. It's a very good warning that Krishna shares to Arjuna. But remember the promise of that dire warning. The annihilation of delusion. That is where we're going. And that is what we're working on. God bless. Let's meditate a little bit.